Hey folks, Ariel over here. I wanted to do a little update on the Snowpack and a whole bunch of other snow related questions we have gotten recently. So hopefully this will answer some of them. It is now getting toward the end of March. If you're watching this later on in time, just so you have an idea of where we're at in the year here. I'm out here by the corner of the tiny house. What you're seeing behind me is the garden, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how the snowpack's doing, and I've gotten so many different snow related questions I just figured I'd do a video on this topic specifically. The snowpack is about the normal amount of moisture content for the year. So a couple things you need to know about that. There is snowpack. That's what you're looking at behind me here, what's sitting on the ground. And you can see we actually had sunshine a couple days, 4 in a row. And over here, there is some bare ground showing. It's where I had everything shoveled and, for the path up to the front door right there. But that has actually melted through to the dirt. We even got 2 days. They got up to like 34, 36. And today it's actually hovering right at 32. In between there, it was 8 below zero again, Fahrenheit. So it's not exactly warm, but we have had like 3 days above freezing. Snowpack is what you're looking at behind me there. It is every time it snows some through the year, and then it may melt, not much of that this year, settle, compact, condense in the sun, sublimate, which is evaporating directly into water vapor without melting first, etc. Then you get another snowstorm. Then it may condense a little. Then you get another, and so on. And as these keep going up, they of course keep putting more pressure on the bottom layers. They tend to get denser and more compacted, etc. That's the snowpack. Snowfall is like, if it was flurrying earlier today, the snowfall for today is like 1/4 of an inch so far. That's what came down today, or generally in any one storm or day, depending how that goes. So if you get a 10-inch snowfall here, it may become, by the next week, 5 inches in the snowpack. Or later on in the year, if it's toward the bottom, that may actually get compressed down to 1 inch, etc. So then there's something called snow water equivalent. It's like if you took all the snow and theoretically melted it all into liquid all at once, how much water would that be? We get very dry snow here most of the time, this year in particular. And there's a chart, if I remember, I'll try to link to it down below. Somebody did, depending on basically the temperature it is when the snow falls, affects how much moisture it is. I've seen people in warmer areas that tend to get wetter snow say there's, like 5 inches of snow is 1 inch of water. The whole way up to, I think the coldest thing on that chart is a temperature that I don't remember for sure, but where it can be 60 inches of snow out of 1 inch of water. Of course, there's a lot of air in that when the crystals are that puffy. We have gotten a lot of very, very dry snow here, though it's about an average as I, check the weather monitoring stations and the closest mountain drainages that are above us. Can't see all the mountaintops behind me right now because of the clouds. It has been flurrying off and on today. The amount reported there by the weather stations, it depends which day you look at it, because the average for that time of year keeps changing every day as you go forward in the year. But generally they've been running somewhere between 95 and 105% of the long-term, like last 3-decade average. It'll get a little lower if it's been a week since we had a storm. It can get a little higher if it just finished storming last night. But the amount of water in there is about normal. The snow inches have actually been slightly higher because we have had a really, really cold year. So when it's colder, the snow gets puffier, basically has more air in it. And so the snow inches have been a little higher. I wished I had done this video about a week ago, because that's when the snow was at the highest. If you can see the garden hoops behind me, they were almost fully covered over in that corner that you probably can't see because of the house corner, which I'm kind of hiding behind because it's a little breezy to try to keep the camera audio quality good. We're actually fully buried. Those are the hoops for the frost covers on the garden beds in the summer. They were completely covered, and the snow was, I could count it on, marks on the fence, etc. And then right after that, I suspect that'll have been the deepest point for the year, though we're certainly not done with snow, I'm sure. We got those 2 days that actually warmed up above freezing, and a whole lot of it condensed. it actually felt like half the the snowpack sank, and I think partly it will do that and start doing that in March, but it was really abrupt this year, and I think it's partly because we had so much fluffy air in that snowpack because our snow was so dry, and we really hadn't had any warm-ups at all, and almost no sunshine, which also can compact it because it can melt it some even when it's not above freezing. We've had very, very little sun all winter. Anyway, so the snowpack, which was puffy and about twice as deep as what you see behind me, just kind of sank. Now that didn't all melt and go away, but basically all the water that was in the top bit ended up still in there, just condensed with less air in there. So it doesn't look quite as impressive as if I'd had time to film this, but I had a busy week and I didn't get to it. So we have about a more normal amount of water in the snowpack, which is great. That also, people look at the snowpack around here. Good boy, don't walk into the camera. Oh, yeah, you bumped it. Bring it here, I'll throw it for you. Bring it here. A little bit closer. Good boy. Oh. It brings up questions about flooding. Are we worried about flooding? What about when it all melts? Is our whole place going to wash away, etc.? I do not anticipate any issues with flooding. Our ground here, as you look at the property, looks fairly flat compared to the mountains behind me, for sure, but it's not. There's actually a pretty good slope to it. So things drain away well because of the slope. They drain away well because here on the valley floor, which is still over 6,000 feet above sea level, but not nearly as high as the mountains behind me or all around me, we are sitting on top in this particular spot of several hundred feet of like loose gravel, other than the little bit of topsoil on the surface. It drains super well. If you remember when we had a break on the pipeline from the gravity-fed spring water that comes into our place during building Clay's shop, we dumped out, I don't know, 100,000 gallons of water on the ground surface. Within like a half hour, it was just slightly muddy on the surface. So stuff drains away really well here. So because of the whole slope of the valley, things drain. Because of the gravel, things drain this way. And this property is actually set up with ditches, irrigation ditches, swales, whatever you want to call them. We didn't do all that. We've touched up and done a little fixing and improving because they'd been not used in a while, but they were existing before we bought the place. So that on the uphill side of the property, water that comes in goes through a double ditch line, or double swale line, whatever you'd like to call that, and is the ground is contoured so it will fan out evenly. So the only way we're really likely to get a flood is actually not from snowmelt, because for one, oh, that's the other thing I should say, snow water equivalent, even, I don't know exactly what it is if I melted all the snow down here, but in the mountains above us, which have even more snow, it's, depending which station you look at, somewhere between 15 and 20 inches of water if you melted all the snow instantly. So that's good because that's pretty much our total precipitation for the year. This is what we rely on for summer moisture in the mountains, but it's not, when you hear that there's 250 inches of snow or 300, or some of the higher mountaintops are over 500, etc. There's not 500 inches of water in that, just to be clear. But anyway, so when everything melts here, for one, it's just going to go in the ground here. There's some muddy ground on the surface right now in the spots where the sun melted it out on our couple warm days. Bring it over here, I'll throw it. Oh, then come through the mud. I was going to try to save you from that. Bring it a little closer. And this will just sink into the ground here. It will cause some mud, muddy feet, muddy boots, muddy paws till the surface dries out, but it's not going to flood anything here. We also are not likely to get any flooding even if the snow in the mountains melts rapidly. Of course, we hope it doesn't really melt rapidly. If it melts slowly, that provides better moisture through the whole summer. But even if it melts rapidly, it drains down the little ditches, the streams will get swollen, the bigger creeks will get swollen, the river will get swollen, and there's a low-lying spots along some of those that are kind of swampy that can get kind of flooded. There are places you can look at and see they flood regularly. Somebody is building a house in one of those right now, a big fancy mansion, which seems like an unwise idea. There's a reason nobody's ever put a building there. But that's not my business. Anyway, it's not going to flood our property here just because of the terrain, where the ditches are, the actual contours that are hard to show with the camera because I know it looks mostly flat right here, but it's not. I got it, babe. This is Burley's favorite thing to do, if you can't tell. The only way we would really flood here is if the creek that goes by our front property line through the trees that the ducks like to play in, that we like to sit along in the summer, etc., if that creek looks like a creek and mostly functions like a creek, but it is actually used for irrigation water on various fields around here. So the only time in the 2 years we've been here now that we've had any flooding was when somebody messed up where they were putting their gates in their ditches and kind of overflowed the creek accidentally. This was on a dry year. It had nothing to do with snow melt. It had to do with people accidentally putting their gates in the wrong place at the wrong time. But even so, it did not hurt anything here. All it did was fill up our one swale ditch, which was perfect, which then gradually filled up the other, which then gradually sheeted the water out across the orchard and watered the orchard. So it was actually wonderful. Everything worked exactly as we wanted it to, and that was perfect. So we're not concerned about flooding here, though there could be some flooding depending how things warm up and melt in some very low-lying areas. But once again, those are areas that normally flood. If you're doing sensible things, you don't put buildings and such in those spots anyway. So that is flooding questions. Snowpack terms. Occasionally I'll have somebody ask me, do I know this? I could actually make a snowman today. This is unusual. This will actually pack into a ball. People ask me, do I know that, Eskimos or somebody like that has up to 50 different words for different kinds of snow? Yeah, if you live in a place that has lots and lots of snow, and especially if you spend a bunch of time outside in it, which means that the lots and lots of snow very much affects what you're doing and how you're doing it, etc., you do come up with lots of names of snow. So this would be getting to be sugar snow, where it's kind of larger grains and it's wet enough to pack. If you walk in it or ski through it, it kind of mushes and remushes. If those grains get melted together a little bigger, that'll be corn snow, which is just a bigger grain than a sugar crystal. Up until a week ago, we pretty much had totally bone dry powder snow. You couldn't pack it off. I grabbed a chunk of it, it would just go fluff. You can also check out the video I did on melting snow for water and see how that works out. And then there's all kinds of ways it can come down. It can come down as, crystals that aren't really snow, just when there's not a cloud in the sky. I've been able to show you that sometimes if the sun's at the right angle, when it's really far below zero, you'll just see any moisture that's in the air is crystallized, and that will also sometimes, condense out of the air and make a snow-looking layer on the surface. It can do things called grapple, or a name I haven't heard anybody else call it. I call it styrofoam snowing, which looks kind of like hail balls, except they're all soft and puffy, made out of snow. Anyway, there's lots and lots of terms for snow, which is kind of fun. And they all affect, like I said, what you can do on it. Right now, the snowpack is starting to get rotten. My good friend Jess, when she came to visit last spring, got a very probably memorable experience with what a rotten snowpack means. It's where instead of being able to stay up and walk on top of something packed, the bottom has warmed up from the ground heat coming up, and because if you can see Burley when he's running behind me right now, it's still solid enough for him. He weighs a little less than me, but if it gets a little more rotten from the ground heat coming up and softening the bottom of the snowpack, you can take a step, and then you'll sink way in, and then you may sink on the next one, and then you may stay on top of the next one. Anyway, we went on a little hike together on a rotten snowpack, and it was kind of exhausting and a lot of work. We're getting to that stage of the year. The crust that's on there now that Burley is running around on is also new. We often get crusts at some point through the winter. This one, because it was so record-breaking cold, we didn't get a crust until just like 5 days ago, because it warmed up and then, compacted and melted down some and then refroze. So now both dogs can walk on top of the snow, no problem. The cats can run across the snow, etc. Early in the morning when it's cold, it would hold me, no problem. By this time of day, it's probably getting a little too mushy for a body weight of a person. But up until then, there was no bottom, there was no pack. If you just stepped on it, it was fluffy powder the entire way to the ground. On the cold note, we are usually cold in, western and northern Wyoming. That's very normal. But we have been colder than average. There's, of course, no data for the month of March yet because we're not at the end of it, but I can tell you for sure it's going to come in as the 5th month in a row of below average temperatures, which is interesting because we get really cold temperatures like minus 30s Fahrenheit or Celsius. That's where the two scales kind of meet. We get some of those usually for, a few days or sometimes 2 or 3 weeks at a time. and then it's a little warmer than that. We have only had one day this winter that was like record-breaking cold for that day, and it wasn't even at our place. I think the coldest I saw that day was minus 29 Fahrenheit, but a town just like over a ridge from us was minus 45 that day. But we've only had one day like that. What has happened is just every low and every high for every day has been colder than average. I think for last month, February, the whole month, every day ran like 9.5 degrees colder than normal. For January, it was like 7.3 degrees colder than normal. And I forget what the totals were for December and November, but they were colder than the average as well. And so far in March, it is being colder than normal. It's right at freezing right now. We had those 2 days that were warmer, but other than that, in between, we've had still nights that were 8 below. That is pretty unusual, actually. Not that we have that happen, but that we have that happen at this time of year. That is not very average. Usually at this time of year, we still have nights for sure below freezing. I mean, we get nights below freezing in the middle of summer, but often the daytime highs are in the high 30s, low 40s. So everything freezes up overnight, but things are starting to melt a little bit and evaporate a little bit during the day. This past week we had highs of like 14, 16, 21, 14 again, etc. So the snow we do have is staying around so far, and it's continuing to snow. Though, like I said, I suspect we've hit the snowpack gradually builds through the different storms. It goes up and it goes down and it goes, up, but I think we've probably hit the peak of it for the year, and now it's going to start going down, and even as we get new storms that bring it back up, it'll probably keep compacting and generally going in a downward direction versus hitting a new peak, unless we get a real record-breaking storm. Clay said he remembered one year they got 3 feet on April 1st, so we could get something like that. That would make it probably look higher. Anyhow, so pretty much all the water is still in the snowpack, like I said, just the top fluffy part of the snow got dissolved and melted and refrozen back into the bottom part, which is why it's dense enough now for the dogs to run around on. So that covered flooding issues. Oh, somebody asked about, you can probably see over here in the corner, the snow up against the tiny house. Is that going to push in on the walls of either the house or the other buildings? Is that going to cause damage? That has not been an issue. I've always, if you've watched for a long time, you probably know I've always shoveled snow as a skirting around the tiny house because it is on wheels and up off the ground. Even though Clay's got it so nicely skirted now with planters, I still did that. But it's really hard actually to keep it sealed against the house wall, even though I shovel it there on purpose, because it does provide a lot of extra insulation. Even though the house is well insulated already, if you have the wall here and you shovel snow up against it, within just a few hours, it's like the snow will peel back just a little bit into itself, just compacting and sinking, and you get this teeny little air gap. If you line up and look, maybe I'll see if I can get a photo or video clip of that, drop it in here. If you look straight down the wall, you can see they're actually not quite touching. So there's actually no moisture sitting against the house wall. Also, all of our building walls right now are like the cedar siding that's stained, and moisture being against it wouldn't be a huge deal, or the metal shop building where moisture is not a big deal either. But anyway, that has not been a problem. And as far as the weight pushing in, it just doesn't, unless you have such a big slide off the roof all at once that it like drops big ice chunks and one of them rolls in, like it could break a window if you have that happen. It usually doesn't put any pressure on the building walls. It has not been an issue in any of our buildings. Also, on the snow sliding off the roof, we haven't had snow stay on any of our roofs. We have steep roofs on every building, whether we're talking the chicken barn, Clay's shop, the tiny house. In this country, having at least a 412 pitch, which, if you're not familiar with roofing terminology, which I was not at one point, that means every 12 inches of distance it goes up or down 4 inches. So that is how steep the angle is. If you have at least a 412 pitch, it will usually slide. Metal roofs slide pretty well, and of course all our roofs are black, which is nice because it soaks up some extra heat. So even when it's well below zero, if the sun comes out at all and there's a little snow on there, the sun warms up that black metal almost instantly and all the snow comes off. So there's no weight buildup. There's never big amounts all coming down at once. That's not an issue. You do have to be aware of both if it builds up a lot and slides a lot. In neighboring Idaho, there was a little girl, like a toddler, buried and severely injured. Last I heard, she was in the hospital under a roof slide. So if you have snow that builds up and then it's going to slide, that is something to be aware of. Don't walk under it. Don't let your kids walk under it. Again, we haven't had that issue because of the way everything is designed around here. It tends to come off really quick, so there's never a big, I mean, it would suck if it fell on your head and dripped water down your neck, but it's not going to hurt you kind of amount. You can kind of see how the edge of that pack is getting mushy, if that showed. Really jumping off there. And you have to be mindful if you have a shallower angle that holds more snow, or a different material. If you do like a shingle or shake roof, some of those will keep the snow up there more than metal will, etc. There has been quite a few buildings that have collapsed in the area this winter, with the exception of one that I'm not sure what happened. Most of them have been older. Most of them have had obvious, like, you could see from driving past them on the road, oh look, that, you know, the main ridge line is failing, the wood is old, it's got a sag in it. You get something like that and then you pile snow on it and it doesn't slide off, the buildings will go in. There's a whole lot of buildings that, instead of being shaped like this right now, have done that and are, you know, a total loss. There's some that are only halfway to the ground because they're currently hung up on the hay bales or the RV or whatever was parked under them, so they couldn't collapse fully, but they're still a total loss. So that's a little bit about how roofs work. Ours, it's just not an issue because of the several things: the pitch, the black color, and the metal material. It just comes off and doesn't build up. Let's see, what other questions did I get a bunch of about snow? One other thing I forgot is avalanches, especially if you follow us on MeWe. You've seen a post there recently about this, but do we get avalanches? Yes, that's where snow slides in the mountains and makes big pileups. They can't hit our property because of the terrain here. We're just far enough out from the steep stuff, even though our property line literally touches one of the first small hills that starts into the big hills that starts into the real mountains. Just the way it's laid out, stuff can't slide onto our property, but it does slide in the area into roads and such, because in places through the mountains, that's the only place you can put a road, and it is steep up above it or near it. And so a few days ago, when we first got that little bit of warm up and the top of the snowpack got heavy, and as you heard me mention, everything down below was soft and fluffy, that of course makes it upside down on the way, and so all kinds of things slid. The one day when I was coming back from cleaning some houses, I think I passed nearly 30 small avalanches that had come down, you know, anywhere from 20 to 70, 80 feet, and piled up either like onto the shoulder or partially into a lane, but hadn't fully closed a lane. But one of those days, there's only 5 major-ish, like, you know, 2-lane, but state road kind of routes in and out of the whole general area that we live in. And at one point on one day, every one of those 5 was closed for some number of hours because of one or more slides that came down, hit the road surface, fully crossed it, piled snow up. You could look up some of WYDOT, that's Wyoming Department of Transportation's photos of clearing avalanches. And, you know, however tall the top of a giant loader or giant grader is, they pile up higher than that. Of course, when snow slides and then stops in a plop, it's a whole different texture, so it's kind of like wet concrete. You can't just drive through it or anything. So it's it will close roads in the area. That can't hit our property, but we do get avalanches. They also happen up in the mountains, at times to skiers or snowboarders. I personally you know, pick cautiously where we do things, like go for the hike you guys saw that Burley and I took the other day, to try to be in places where it is very unlikely that we're going to be under something that could slide down on top of us. But we do get avalanches. They don't hit our property, and you can generally stay out from under them if you exercise a little bit of caution. And that's way too much to go into in this video, but there's a whole snow science there. In this area, there are AVI classes for people who go snowmobiling, backcountry skiing, etc. If you want to learn about how to take a sample, dig a sample pit in the snowpack, see where the layers are, see what's likely to break, know what the conditions are and what the temperatures have been, and that's different on every slope and angle. Is it north or northwest or south facing or southwest or eastern and whatever, and where is it wind loaded, and is it likely to break under you and kill you, and all of that. But that's way too in-depth to get into in this video. Anyway, that's the avalanche. I think that's all the main ones I can think of. So that's how flooding works. how we're not concerned about that, how the snow does sitting up against the buildings. The only place we have shoveled it down from, both around the house and the shop, is away from the windows. That is somewhat because if it did start to warm up and melt fast, it could, if your windowsill is here, you know, your window is here, and your snow pile is higher, it could leak backwards in a window seam. That's possible because the windows are more made for water coming down to seal it, not for water seeping sideways. But we also want to be able to see out the windows. So we've shoveled it back down to at least level with the windowsill on all the buildings that have windows, mostly just because we want the light and to see out. But other than that, it's no problem against the buildings. We have about a normal amount of moisture. I suspect we've topped out on the snowpack, and it is colder than normal. And I will admit, I am ready for it to warm up a bit. Like I said, we often get days, you know, into the low 40s at this time of year. This is when people think it's really crazy that I'm out running around in a t-shirt when they can still see snowbanks this taller around me. These would look even taller if I'd hand shoveled everything rather than using the snowblower, which can throw the snow, you know, much further out than I can with a shovel. But yeah, I'll be out like totally comfortable in a t-shirt, and it's and people think that's crazy when they see that much snow, but it is genuinely not comfortable in a t-shirt right now. This jacket and scarf feel pretty good, and I don't know the next like 2 weeks as far out as they've forecasted. Look, which, you know, I don't necessarily trust the forecast, but they don't look like it's going to even get up to freezing for most of that time either. So if you're wondering, our little chicklets with their mama Foggy are doing good, but they've only had now 2 afternoons of their entire life, from when their eggs were laid to now that they're 2.5 weeks old, that came above freezing. They seem to be doing well. Velcro did. You're going to have a video on this. Our cat Velcro has 4 little kittens that are so adorable. They are in the shop beside the wood stove. They're doing well, but as they grow, it'd be nice if they come outside. We've got some ducklings on the way here in a few weeks, and I was hoping for it to be early spring, but not necessarily hoping for it to be the middle of winter when they showed up. So we'll see. I love the snow, but at this point in time, I'd be ready to be done with the below 0 Fahrenheit temperatures for the year. If it could warm up to and stay nearer to freezing at this point, or at least in the 20s or something, that would be kind of pleasant. So hopefully that answered snow questions. If there's more questions that I've forgotten or that you have that I didn't address, please ask them down below, and maybe eventually, if there's a bunch of them, I'll get another snow questions answered. But that's where we're at right now.
We hope you enjoyed it.
Come back next time for more adventures.
Thanks for watching.